Thank you, thank you. Can you hear me? Loud and clear? Good. Hello everybody, welcome to this talk. The very first thing that I want to do is say thank you to Nordic Game Jam for inviting me to speak at the event. And also thank you to all of you for lending me the next half hour of your time. I know that you'll get to jamming pretty soon and we'll unveil the theme and everything. So you're probably pretty excited and maybe a little bit anxious. And that's okay. I can't make time go faster, but I can hope to keep your thoughts occupied for a little bit. I'll say that I'm also very excited and a little bit anxious. It's been quite a while since I've done public speaking, and this is definitely public speaking. But let's jump into it. So the topic that I chose, well, when Nordic Game Jam reached out to me, they kind of carefully instructed me not to choose something that was too technical. Keep things light and breezy and maybe inspirational, and as someone who has pretty much exclusively done things that are pretty technical, that was a little bit of a challenge, but a really fun one, and it allowed me to talk about something that I wouldn't otherwise have had the chance to talk about. And the topic that I chose is celebrating imperfection. Why I think that we really need game jams in 2025. But first, who am I? Well, Karina did a little hype introduction. My name is Asbjørn Thirslund. I am Danish, and I've been teaching game development for quite a while. And in 2012, I started this channel here, the Brackeys YouTube channel. In the beginning, it was just me, and then we grew to be a team with kind of the mission of making game development more accessible. And that was really interesting and fun. And then I decided to stop for 3 years and took a break. But then game development got me. I had to get back in. And so these days, I'm spending a lot of my time learning the Godot engine and figuring out ways to best teach it to beginners and professionals who are looking to pick up some of these tools. Now, I attended 2 talks yesterday here, and both of them featured cats. And I thought, I have to get in on that. So earlier I added this. Aww. Right thing for the right crowd. This is Molly. She loves sinks, hates tap water, the difficulties of life. And she also really, really enjoys destroying studio equipment, such as black screens. The last thing you need to know about me is that I jam a lot. In fact, I sat down to count how many times I've participated in a game jam, and I came up with at least 15, which I thought was a lot until yesterday, when I spoke to a person, and he was 16, and he had participated in 20 game jams. Is that person here? Can you raise your hand? You're right there, man. You're right there. This guy, he jams. Yeah. I guess I will have to kind of up my game a little bit. And of course, many of the games that I've created, I've also tried to document through, what do you call it, postmortems, video essays, talking about what went right, what went wrong, and giving a little bit of insight into the process that I sometimes have with this sort of stuff. And other than that, I organize, or I should say co-organize, the Brackeys Game Jam, because I do so together with members of the community of the Brackeys Discord channel. And it's a bit different in format than this jam. It runs for 2 weeks and is online only. So the plan is not to not sleep for 2 weeks. The plan is to jam a little more chill over a little longer. And we've been doing this for a little while now. We just finished up the 13th installment of the jam. It runs twice a year, where we got a record-breaking 10,000, for us record-breaking 10,000 participants. So that was just awesome. So again, hammering it home, I like game jams. And I've spent a lot of time both jamming and organizing these events. But I have this problem. And So some of you might recognize this. Whenever I try to explain game jams to people outside of the industry, it usually goes a little bit like this. So you know I start off with the basics, and these are definitely different emojis. This is a different computer. But they'll do, it's fine, you get the message. Well, we hope they're all pretty much equivalent. I start off strong, you know, saying you get together a bunch of people, you divide into groups, and with a limited amount of time, you make a game. So far, so good. And people normally go, oh, right, so it's like a tournament for nerds. Well, yes, it's for technically minded people, sure. And sometimes it's a competition, but there are rarely prizes. So it's totally secondary. And then I can see people thinking, and they go, oh, you make a game, so you can publish that game and make money off of it, right? And again, I'll have to go like, well, if it's a really good game, you can spend another couple of years perfecting it, and maybe down the line, you get to publish it and make some money. But this rarely happens. In fact, think of it more like a fun gaming weekend with friends, except instead of gaming, you work all night. So your boss makes you go. No, it's completely voluntary, and I look forward to it for months. And this is usually kind of where I lose people. And I think I figured out why. But before we get to that, I want to just quickly talk about how game jams came to be. Is this bad for the microphone that I go here? No. It's just me? Okay, it's just my ear. Fine. Talk about how game jams came to be and how they've evolved over the time. So in the 1990s, the first game jam-like events started to arise. And depending on when in the 1990s, I was either not conceived yet, or definitely too young to jam. So there are people much more qualified to talk about this than I am. Instead, we'll skip on a little bit to 2002. Where the first indie game jam was held. And this is the event that coined the phrase game jam. And of course, they were all programmers, so the first indie game jam was, of course, Indie Game Jam 0. It was an event organized by some industry veterans who wanted to push the innovation in the field. They wanted to experiment and push the technology as far as it could go. So it was very focused on tech, custom engines, and the programmer. Later that same year, in 2002, Ludum Dare came along and was, of course, the beginning of online game jamming. Then in 2006, this event, Nordic Game Jam, held their first event, which I saw was back then described as a workshop. And it kind of solidified the large on-site jam tradition, and also further iterated upon what a game jam is by dividing people into groups and some of these practices that work really well. In 2009, there was the Global Game Jam, which of course today is the record holder for the largest ever game jam. Not in 2009, but recently, one of their events. And then we come to the 2010s. And I have decided to call the 2010s the decade of game jams. And I've done this because so many people joined in the 2010s, including myself. And I've decided to show this with a graph. And I'm now realizing that I said I wouldn't get technical, and now I'm showing a graph. So I've put a tiny sorry here in the top right corner to kind of move past that. And what this shows is Ludum Dare entries over time. Starts in 2009 and goes all the way to pretty much present day in 2023. And we can see the meteoric rise in the early 2010s, where it goes from under 100 participants each year, or not participants, entries, submissions, to over 7,000. I should also say that these are aggregates of all the events held each year, which is also why it gets a little weird to the right side of this line, because this is when Ludum Dare stopped being consistent with three events a year, and so the data gets a little murky. And then itch comes along and allows anyone to host a game jam. And I've, of course, decided to show this with a graph. Again, really sorry. And historically, the two largest game jams on itch has been the DMTK Game Jam and the Brackeys Game Jam, which started in 2017 and 18 respectively. And we can just again see the nice growth that they've been on. Of course, the Brackeys Game Jam does drop off, but I feel I can explain this fairly easily. What I've highlighted here is the period of time where I decided to take a 3-year break. So these were events held with pretty much no marketing push from me whatsoever. And we're also already seeing in 2025 that we're matching all of the events we held in 2024. So I think it's safe to say that game jams have been growing a lot and that they're still growing to this day. But not only that, they've also kind of taken another role in the industry. They used to be considered kind of fun pastime activities, something you do on your own time, maybe to practice, but not really something that was taken super seriously. They are now. Game studios host their own internal game jams to reap the many benefits of game jamming. And so by being here today, you're not only going to have fun and do some jamming, you're also going to be improving at what has become an industry practice. Something that especially indie game studios are increasingly doing. And of course, a lot of cool games have sprung from game jams. Everything from Superhot to Inscription to Forager to, of course, Baba Is You, which was made at this very jam or started at this very jam. And at this point, I wanted to ask you guys, the audience, a question. Get a little interactive. And the question that I want to ask, and as soon as I'm done asking it, please just do shout your best guess right back at me, is how, if we take all of the entries for Global Game Jam over the years, just Global Game Jam, how many games do you think have been submitted?
Million. 30,000. 100,000.
30,000. Do we have 100,000? You, sir, are correct. Someone here was a little off by 1 billion, I think. 100,000 jam games for just this event alone. That's not anything of the hundreds, if not thousands of jams on itch. It's not Lundari, it's not this event, it's nothing. It's just this thing, 100,000. Hopefully working, definitely submitted games. Now, what's my point in talking about the history of game jams and showing you some of these large numbers? My point is actually twofold. The first part is that as someone who has spent a career so far trying to make game development more accessible, these numbers are proof that that has become a reality. So I think that's pretty awesome. The second point is that unfortunately, I think that it can lead to a bit of a feeling. Perhaps a not too pleasant feeling that I hope none of you are familiar with, but I think a lot of you are. A feeling of, with so many games out there, many of them really, really good, made by professionals, how can I ever contribute? How can I make something that is not only good enough, but that will also stand out in this sea of games? Now, I should say that I think this is a general thing for the industry. This is not a thing about game jams. The industry is bigger than ever. Game development is very popular. There are so many good games and screenshots of those games everywhere. There's so much advice to find on how to be a good developer. So many tutorials on how to do X, Y, and Z. Even really, really great assets that you can download and use. And I think with all of this high quality and this high quantity, we can have high expectations. Maybe we have really high expectations for games. Maybe we have really high expectations for developers. But I think definitely developers have really high expectations for themselves. And I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try and meet those expectations. Because in a climate with so much good stuff, my game has to look at least as good as all these games. My game has to have the cool features of these other games. My game has to sound great, it has to be original, it has to do multiplayer, integrate with services, it has to support all of the platforms, and the code base must be pristine. In other words, my game just has to be perfect, or I don't belong. I'm not good enough to be in this industry. I think this is very unfortunate, and I think you can call it a lot of things. You can call it imposter syndrome, you can call it a lack of motivation, you can call it self-doubt. I'm not here to diagnose anyone, but what I think it can ultimately lead to is this. Can you see this? Just giving up. And as someone who has tried to teach a lot of people game development, I hate this. This is my enemy. Now, so far, I've spent a lot of energy trying to use game jams to point your attention to this problem or this challenge that some of you might be facing. And this could lead to the wrongful conclusion that game jams are the problem. I don't think that they are. I, of course, think that game jams are at least a partial solution to this. And one of the reasons why I think we need game jams in 2025. Because in a climate where it's so easy to get hung up on chasing whatever idea you have of perfection, imperfection is the perfect antidote. And game jams are great at celebrating imperfection. Now, what do I mean by this? Sounds great. What does it mean? I think game jams enforce actually imperfection through two primary mechanisms. The first is, of course, the theme, which means that you cannot prepare beforehand. You have to just show up with what you can. And the second one is the time limit, which makes sure that you cannot keep pushing the deadline. You cannot keep putting things in, polishing. You have to be satisfied with whatever you end up with when the time runs out. Now, what's so great about imperfection? Aren't we just celebrating mediocrity then? Of course, I don't think that we are. Then I wouldn't be having this talk. I think there are a lot of benefits of creating a climate where you allow for imperfections. One of them is obvious. It gives you a break from the pressure. If you're an indie developer, spending a lot of years pouring yourself into a project, your heart and your soul, and just getting more and more anxious for that project to be successful, whatever your version of successful is, that's pressure building up. And even if you're just a hobbyist, you might be spending a lot of time comparing yourself to the work of professionals, which can lead to a feeling of inadequacy. You get a break from that as well. I also think it creates a free and fun environment to be in. The pressure is off, everybody's all giggly, ready to meet people and try things out. I also think that it stimulates learning. And I guess you'll just have to trust me on this, but I've taught a lot of people game development. And one of the very big roadblocks that I find for people trying to learn is a fear of making mistakes. Embracing mistakes means allowing yourself to make them and learn from them, and then you learn way more quickly. It also creates an environment that's great for discovery and experimentation. As we've already established, game jams spring from a tradition of experimentation and innovation. And allowing yourself to make mistakes means that you can chase some of those ideas that you're unsure of. Some of those things that have a chance of working. Might be a total disaster, but hey, it's a jam game. Or might turn out to be really, really interesting. In general, it just allows us to think a little less and do a little more. If you're someone like me who sometimes gets stuck with blank canvas syndrome, this idea of a blank scene in your editor, not knowing what the first thing to put in there should be, or a blank Photoshop canvas where no matter what brushstroke you put in there, it doesn't feel like the right brushstroke because it's just a brushstroke. It's not going to be pretty yet. Game jams are a great way of forcing you out of that habit into kind of an iterative loop where a lot of game development shines. At this point, I want to say that we didn't invent all of this good stuff. These are things that artists, through a bunch of different industries and professions, have figured out work really well to enhance the creative process. If, for example, you're a painter, lots of painters do speed sketching or croquis. Writers attend writing camps. A friend pointed out to me that professional chefs, especially when it comes time to making a new dish or adding a new dish to the menu in really high-end restaurants, will often host cook-offs, where every chef gets a limited amount of time to create the best version of that dish that they can, and they'll then vote on the result. And the winner dish will be perfected by the entire team following the next few weeks. And I could list many examples. Engineers have hackathons. And of course, game jam comes from jam session as we know it from music. I play the drums, and some of the things that I enjoy about jamming on the drums with friends are the exact same things that I enjoy about jamming in game development. And also, I have another friend who is a professional musician, and whenever he describes going to the studio, whenever they need to lay down a track, as they say, or create an album, they will block off studio time and try to create an environment that is often very much like a jam environment. Blocking off that time, bringing snacks, really honing in on whatever you want to do, and using different techniques to try and limit their creativity to then spark something. Staying on the subject of music, this is Mick Gordon at GDC in 2017. This is an awesome talk. It's about the creation of the soundtrack for Doom 2016. I really recommend you check this talk out. And I think other than that, the soundtrack for Doom 2016 is one of my favorite soundtracks in modern gaming. And what is really cool is that in his talk, he does talk, of course, about the pedals that he used and what they did specifically to create that music. But he also puts a lot of emphasis on the process. Because in his own words, change the process, change the outcome. And the pitch for Doom was very much we wanted something that sounded different. Well, to get a different outcome, you have to be willing to get a bit different with the process. But I don't know about you. I think this can be scary. Because just like musicians, we as game developers can get pretty caught up in whatever process we have and what we know works. If we find something that we know works, we tend to repeat it. It starts to feel comfortable. It's reproducible. We know that this gets good results. And so it can be almost scary to break out of that and try something completely different. So to do this, you have to create, as he also highlights, an environment where you feel comfortable in failure, or as I'm kind of calling it, embracing imperfections. Now, I'm making this comparison because just like music, just like composers, working with game development is creative. Yes, it combines this with huge technical challenges, but it's fundamentally creative at its core. And so we can also allow ourselves to think about our process. As creatives, that is something that I think is important to do once in a while. And game jams are a great way of experimenting with that. And at this point, I think we are ready to go back to the start of me trying to explain game jams to people outside the field. Again, starting off with the basics, a bunch of people divided into groups, limited time, make a game. But I think when people ask me if it's a competition, I always go, no, there are no prizes. But I don't think that's quite true. The prize is the things that you learn and the friends that you make along the way. That's right, I got a little cheesy with it. I am a little cheesy. Okay. Thanks, guys. And also, I kept insisting like you work all night, but that's not quite true either. You do work, for sure. But you also get to just play and experiment. And it's in an environment where you don't have to be afraid of making mistakes. You can do those things that are scary for you. You can change your process. You can do something you're not used to. And no one will judge you for it. Hopefully, not even yourself. I made my very first Unity game at a huge LAN party in Sweden. I also made the Brackeys logo at that LAN party. This wasn't a game jam, granted. Didn't know they existed at the time. The atmosphere was pretty similar. Lots of energy drink, and definitely no pressure. So it's safe to say that game jams have improved my life, and I use them all the time for improving my process and getting out of my head. And I hope, of course, that they can do some of the same for you. And no matter what, for the next 48 hours, I hope you'll all try and be relieved, let go of some of that pressure, and celebrate imperfection together. Thank you.